My guest today is Camile Pêtre, CFO at BeZero Carbon and one of the co-founders of Women in Carbon. Our conversation today focuses not only on Camile's background in private equity and consulting, but also on the genesis for the formation of the group Women in Carbon. Camile, thank you so much for coming and joining me today on the Carbon Exposure Project. It's a real pleasure to have you and really keen to obviously showcase not only your personal story, but the initiative that you and your colleagues at Women in Carbon have commenced. And I think it's incredibly inspirational. We're talking about that off camera. So first and foremost, welcome.
Likewise, thank you very much, Renee, for having me in this amazing setup. It's really a pleasure to be here.
It's a good setup. So this is the first time that I've been playing, let's say, an away game. So now, typically, obviously, I'm based in Singapore, but here in London, and I couldn't think of a better guest to have here on the podcast. So thanks again. Maybe can you indulge me? We begin just in terms of your story. Obviously, in preparation for today's kind of conversation, we talked, and I found not only is your story incredibly inspirational, but like your reaction to kind of the lack of representation of women in carbon, I think is incredibly interesting. So can you give us just a quick background in terms of your professional journey up to date?
Yeah,
I think that'd be great as a scene setter.
So I kind of landed in the carbon industry around 1.5 years ago. Okay. I got that amazing opportunity to join BeZero Carbon as their new CFO. But I come actually from a very different background. So
okay, what's that background?
My background is mostly in private equity and management consulting. Okay. So I worked at KKR and BCG before. Okay. Both sectors are kind of also have a lack of representation in terms of women. Mm-hmm. But then when I landed in carbon industry, I was there like, we have an amazing opportunity to actually make a difference here, yes, right? And to shape this industry to make it more gender balanced, mm-hmm, because it's a relatively new industry. It's rapidly scaling. There are tons of new jobs, innovative jobs opening up for the new generations and for people, the new workforce coming in.
Exactly.
So yeah, I thought like, let's try to do something because there didn't seem to be anything available off the shelf, mm-hmm, even for me to just like learn from other people, other women in this space. And
like our industry, like many other industries, I'm not sure if it's the same in private equity and in consulting, but it's kind of effectively closed. You know, a little circle of effectively, you know, like there's little echo chambers that we kind of are in, right? Some call it nerdy or whatever it might be, but it's kind of closed. And I think having new entrants coming into the market is really stimulatory in terms of the energy, but in diversity of opinion, right? And then we're talking about the gender representation components. It's really important. So how did you, when you came in, how did you then seek out peers to be able to learn and, yeah, maybe just on that component,
so
learn about carbon markets?
Yeah, I think in private equity, in management consulting, you have a lot of platforms that are available, mm-hmm, to exchange ideas, to learn from each other. Yeah. You don't really have that for carbon. Yeah. At least you have a lot of initiatives around climate, etc. But I wanted something specifically on carbon, also because there is a lot to learn in this industry. There are tons of different actors. Yeah. And the best way to just learn and just deep dive into it is just talk to people.
Yeah, that's learn by doing.
Yeah, the best way to learn. Yeah. So I was seeking for something and just realized there was nothing out there. So let's build something. So I started to discuss with some of my brilliant peers, and just with 9 of them, we decided to launch Women in Carbon.
Great. Okay, so I mean, fantastic, because it shows courage, but it's a reaction to essentially the absence of that representation. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so that's the genesis essentially for Women in Carbon. It's a fairly new organization.
It is.
Can you give me some context in terms of how long it's been around?
Yeah, so we launched the initiative officially in March last year. Since then, we've organized like already 6 events, big panel discussions, and a couple of networking drinks to just bring people together. Okay. We also have our dedicated social network channel where people can exchange and just learn from each other. So it's a great way for women to connect and to be inspired by more senior women in the industry.
Great. And so that's fantastic. And so, okay, I've got a number of questions on that front. Yeah. But in terms of, so now you've got effectively a venue, a platform for this discourse to occur. And you've got other like-minded women coming together, talking and sharing their perspectives and effectively having a voice, right? And the representation. So that's fantastic. So in terms of, you know, getting this group together and providing that platform and representation. So now you've had 6 events. What are the benefits, do you think, in terms of having this discourse has brought so far?
Yeah. So we're talking about a new industry, a new carbon industry, where we get a chance to establish like a proper balance in terms of gender and overall diversity.
Yeah.
I think like what we see is there was like that big study released by BCG last year that basically said that the expectation is that by 2030, only 1/4 of the entire like green jobs available out there globally will be filled by women. So that's definitely a problem, and it's really shocking.
Huge problem.
Yeah,
because it's a missed opportunity.
Yeah. So while I really hate when people really talk about diversity in terms of percentages, because I think percentages are great, they're a great measure of success, but they're not really like a tool or anything. I do think that representation and percentages matter because they're a catalyzer for change. It starts with representation. Like it's proven when you have senior women in very senior positions in companies, it definitely attracts more young talent.
Of course, because it creates essentially a North Star for young people entering the market, that it's essentially representation, that there is a possibility for them to actually pursue this as a career.
And that's exactly the essence of the Women in Carbon initiative. Great. It's just like help attract young talent to this industry by showcasing the successes of women in this industry and the contributions that they're bringing.
Great, and there's so much innovation. Like, I was talking off camera earlier about this with you and with others around effectively there's this Cambrian explosion that's going on in carbon markets, but in climate in general, where there's this, there's lots of changes that are happening, right? So you guys at BeZero are, underwriting this effectively with regards to the kind of paradigm shift around ratings. Fantastic. There's, infrastructure building, registries, Integrity Council on voluntary carbon markets, looking at the integrity side of things, VCMI with regards to claims. There's all this really big, bright innovation. You even look at the decentralization and like, all of this stuff in terms of methodologies as well. There's space here for not only inclusion, but diversity of thought. Not necessarily just the gender component, but we need representation to give us better ideas. Otherwise, it becomes essentially not only a boys' club, but an echo chamber.
Exactly, and I think it's proven by tons of studies, right?
Yeah, completely.
So we do say that diverse teams tend to just be more innovative, as you're saying. They tend to like showcase better financial performance. They also tend to be better at problem solving.
Sure.
So all of that is really important, and but how to explain really like how diversity really helps teams to think differently. I mean, like one story that I always like to tell.
Please, I'd love to hear it.
Is I don't know if you know that, but so it has been proven, and this is quite a serious study actually, that women have 73% more chance to suffer from very serious injuries or even like fatal injuries in a car crash, in a frontal car crash.
Okay.
And so why is that? It's apparently because of seatbelts. And seatbelts were designed by engineers that tend to be like mostly men, and that actually designed a solution that was adapted and adjusted for the people that they knew best and that they could test it for themselves.
The men. Yeah.
And
so different body mass, different tension, I would imagine.
Different. And so that's a really interesting point, because I think it's also like what we all tend to do. We tend to solve problems based on what we know best.
Bias.
Exactly. And so these biases can be like based on our gender, based on our like cultural origins, or based on our education. But these are all important components. So I think when you bring in diversity, you also help people think differently about problems.
And that's incredibly important, not only at the startups, but in established businesses and larger organizations.
Everywhere.
Right? Challenging the status quo. Fantastic. I mean, that's a really important point. I think it deserves the emphasis component. Can I go back a little bit, though? Can you indulge me? You said something really interesting, which you said women in, and I'm paraphrasing here, so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but effectively you said women in senior roles in organizations effectively serve as role models for the younger generation. Now to kind of reflect it back to you, you sit in the C-suite at one of the premier rating agencies in our industry, BeZero. Do you feel that you're playing that role model role at the moment, and what's that impact feel like as well for you?
I mean, I do hope that I can be a role model for younger people in this industry, and I try to make enough time also to share back and give back to the industry. I think I've been very lucky along my career. I've found like amazing role models that could really help me evolve, and these role models were women or men, but very great people that helped me also like understand differences and just evolve in my career. So I do hope that it can also give back a little bit more to the next generation. I find it really, really important.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's really important. And it's not just anecdotal, right? It does serve as a template effectively for younger women, in this case, to follow the path of the people in front of them, effectively, folks like yourself. So that's really great. In terms of, can we now just kind of focus on the Women in Carbon kind of initiative, right? You've established essentially the lack of that representation that was the impetus for the group itself. And now you've effectively scaled that group.
Yeah.
What's the number of representatives? Like how many members do you have in the group?
So we have more than 2,000 members today.
More than 2,000 members.
Following us on.
And it's only been a little bit over a year. A year and a half.
Not even, yeah. Not even, 6 months.
6 months?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Really, a bit more than 6 months.
2,000 members?
Yeah.
That's incredible.
So, yeah. There is a lot of interest in the space. I was at the conference yesterday and I did like that very short speech to introduce the initiative, and tons of people just came to me and said like, wow, this is amazing. And both men and women, because everyone realizes the value in diversity overall. Completely. So no, there is definitely like a lot of interest.
Okay. And is the focus exclusively on carbon, or does it over time stretch to broader climate? I mean,
I think there are enough initiatives around like climate, women in, like you have women in climate initiatives. I think here we really want to focus it on carbon. Because I think there is enough to learn in the carbon space and expertise to share. So yeah, no, definitely like the aim is to keep it around carbon.
Specifically focused. Okay, so 2,000 members.
Yeah.
Okay, that's amazing. One of, I guess, the issues with regards to growth is that then how do you make it inclusive with regards to events? I mean, if you're hosting an event and you've got 2,000 people, that's a pretty big event. So how does it work? Does it bifurcate in terms of regional chapters? Because I would imagine also the representation is not just London, EU based, but we're also looking at a global context, right? Am I correct?
Correct. So we opened up actually our New York chapter in September during Climate Week.
Fabulous.
So big success, and we're looking to open up more chapters like this. Like a lot of women are just raising their hand and saying like, wow, I want something like this where I live. So yeah, definitely the aim is to continue to open up chapters.
Great. Can you give us a sneak peek in terms of what it might be the next geographies that you expand into?
So Switzerland is the next one, and I'm also working now on San Francisco because I think there is a very big hub there.
Can I throw Singapore's hat in the ring
for
this? Because I think Singapore's certainly growing as a carbon hub. There's so much support from the government and the different let's say verticals, different ministries that are focusing on establishing Singapore. Not only it's already a well-established financial hub and a commodities hub, but carbon is one of the 3 pillars effectively for growth in the country's plans. And I can say it's not just anecdotal, but the representation of amazing women in the sector in Singapore warrants effectively consideration for your expansion. I'm sure if you look at the numbers, you probably already have quite a lot of women in Singapore.
No, definitely.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, cool. So I mean that's pretty great in terms of expansion, not only membership, but then the geographic sort of spread and kind of expansion. What's next then in terms of plans for Women in Carbon?
So I think the initial aim was really to start to build like kind of that community and have kind of a mass that brings us to light and brings these initiatives to light.
Yep.
The next step is also, as we discussed with the co-founders, is how do we now transform that and take all that knowledge and everything that we put together, how do we start contributing to the market itself and help it evolve? So I think that's really the next step also. How do we first set up mentorship programs?
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, exactly. How do we build roundtables? How do we contribute and share pieces around the big topics that are discussed today in the carbon market? So that's definitely something that we're working towards. Like we have tons of projects in mind.
I can imagine.
It's just a matter of how we and where we focus our energy today.
And how you execute it as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I mean, a lot of questions there because obviously those are grand plans and ambitions in terms of the growth and expansion for this. But effectively, what are the rate limiting steps? I don't imagine that you would struggle from a financing perspective. Not only are the women that are your members, and here I'm extrapolating, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but effectively they're already in senior positions within these organizations. I think that they can rally some of the contributions to help for this to actually achieve its outcomes in terms of growth. But what are the other kind of constraints that you guys are coming up with?
I think the big constraint definitely is like time.
Time.
So all co-founders, we have full-time jobs, and this is basically something that we do in our magic time, as I like to call it. So yeah, definitely, like we need to think about our structure, how we're going to structure ourselves going forward to just be able to also continue to build on this initiative and take the amazing energy that we have here and continue on our next steps. Yeah.
Okay, so like a governance, maybe a full-time dedicated CEO to running this opportunity.
Yeah.
Maybe that's kind of like a dream job, right? For some people to come in and actually lead that. That's fantastic. Okay, I mean, thank you very much, obviously, for the time. Maybe we take a quick pause. And I think I've been talking and you've been talking quite a lot, so maybe have a quick drink. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.